largest U.S. grand jury investigations regarding sexual abuse in the Catholic Church took place in the Catholic Diocese of Pennsylvania. The 900-page report that took over 2 years to be rated by over 23 grand jurists covers the following 6 out of 8 Pennsylvania Catholic dioceses: Allentown, Scranton, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, Greensburg, and Erie. Altoona, Jonestown, and Philadelphia were dioceses included in earlier investigations. The report, released in August 2018 in the most damning language possible, details the decades-long covered-up child sexual abuse cases by both bishops and leaders of the Roman Catholic Church. In the last 70 years, more than 300 predator priests were found to have committed acts of sexual abuse towards 1,000 identifiable child victims. And these are only the cases in which the victims have chosen to come forward. On more details on this document, Amos has the report.
The grand jurist revealed that the pattern of the clergy was the same in all cases. Quote, "To cover up the abuse and to avoid scandal appears over and over again for each instance. According to the Supreme Court, the victims who were too afraid and terrified to speak up are said to be in thousands, aside from the 1,000 child victims already identified. The children were both boys and girls, although the predominant cases involved boys, all of which were young children, teenagers, and minors. The sexual abuse commonly involved manipulation using positions of power and alcohol. There have been other reports about child sex abuse within the Catholic Church," the report said, "but never on this scale. For many of us, those earlier stories happened someplace else, someplace away. Now we know the truth. It happened everywhere."
You see, church officials routinely and purposefully described the abuse as horseplay and wrestling and inappropriate contact. It was none of those things. It was child sexual abuse, including rape, committed by grown men, priests, against children.
On the day of August 15, 2018, Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro, through an almost hour-long grand jury press conference, points out the gathered findings of the covered-up clergy sexual abuse through 500,000 internal church documents. The numerous occurrences of abuse are far too horrifying to state in detail, as only a few examples of the report mentions events where a priest confessed to sexually assaulting over 15 young boys, with one being as young as the age of 7, and another priest who had impregnated a minor and had helped her get an abortion. This predator priest was still able to be present in the ministry. The report states that almost every case was too old to be prosecuted, and only 2 of the priests out of the 300 involved were identified and charged with their heinous crimes, including one of them who continually sexually assaulted 2 children for years on end until 2010. It reads, quote, "We know that child abuse in the church has not yet disappeared because we are charging 2 priests in 2 different dioceses with crimes that fall within the statute of limitations."
Why are you not repentant of the abuse that you've done?
The report that has since shocked not only Pennsylvania but the world came soon after the resignation of Cardinal Theodore E. McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington, who was accused of not only sexually abusing young priests and seminarians but also minors, all detailed in a more than 400-page report. The intensive investigation of the misdeeds of the past cardinal has since led to his resignation. This came not long after the news about him abusing an altar boy decades before has since given many more of his victims a chance to speak out. Not long after, the grand jury in Pennsylvania continues to do so, calling out the heinous crimes the Catholic Church continues to hide.
According to the grand jury, quote, "Despite some institutional reform, individual leaders of the church have largely escaped public accountability. Priests were raping little boys and girls, and the men of God who were responsible for them not only did nothing, they hid it all for decades." The revelation has since revealed that while some priests involved were removed from the ministry, the higher-ups that protected them remained in the institution, as some were even granted promotions. Cardinal Donald Wuerl, the Archbishop of Washington, had even vouched for an abusive priest mentioned in the report. The jury wrote, quote, "Until that changes, we think it is too early to close the book on the Catholic Church sex scandal. Church officials have since followed a, quote, playbook for concealing the truth. They have minimized this abuse by using the words inappropriate contact instead of rape and failing to inform the community of the real reasons behind removing an accused priest."
But Gagan is accused of molesting more than 100 children during his 30-year career as a priest, some of whom came to court today to face the man, they say, who has given them nightmares for decades.
Not guilty.
After appearances in Suffolk and Middlesex courts, Gagan's accusers filed silently past him as the former priest stood behind a wall of his friends and relatives. But outside the courtroom a few minutes later, emotions ran high. Mr. Gagan, what do you say to your alleged victims?
He can't say anything. He's a pig. He's a filthy pig. You're a filthy pig.
Sexual abuse scandals and investigations have been centered around the Catholic Church for more than 15 years, with case after case emerging ever since the criminal charges filed against Reverend John J. Gagan in Boston, Massachusetts. Between 1996 and 2000, 70 people had accused Gagan of sexual abuse. By 2001, the claims had led to criminal charges in 84 civil suits, 70 by alleged victims and the rest by their family members in his 30-year career as a Roman Catholic priest. Even with these crimes, Gagan was transferred from parish to parish for years as an attempt to cover up his behavior before the church finally defrocked him in 1998. He was only sentenced to 9 to 10 years in 2002, and the investigative team of Boston Globe was able to uncover a pattern of sexual abuse by even more priests hidden within the Boston Archdiocese. The widespread media coverage has since exposed churches around the world, and they regularly covered up instances of predatory priests.
Pennsylvania is like the epicenter for child sexual abuse, and
we're a
the victim
paradise.
Exactly.
The emotion felt by Mary McHale, Julianne Bortz, and Sean Doherty over being sexually abused by priests as children is still raw.
August 13th, 2021 had marked 3 years since the release of said Pennsylvania grand jury report. Since then, 13 states, including Washington, D.C., have made it easier for victims to file civil suits against church leaders. Many of the affected and shaken in Pennsylvania, though, to this day are still waiting for their day in court. Mary McHale, Julianne Bortz, and Sean Doherty were victims of sexual abuse by priests when they were children, and the memories of the trauma still feel very much real, saying, quote, "They murdered something in me, something died." According to Judy, her son's accidental overdose was due to his own experience with being sexually assaulted by a priest when he was just 15.
Judy Deven says her son's accidental overdose can be traced to his rape by a priest when he was 15.
His soul was just sucked out of him, and he tried so hard to live with it.
And I think a lot of people still don't get it. They hear abuse. He was violently raped.
Yeah.
When asked about the abuse detail in the grand jury report and if it was able to cover the magnitude and the number of victims that it did, all three of them gave a resounding no. Mary says, quote, "I just had no clue. How many victims came forward to me? That was mind-blowing also. He admitted to the grand jury and reported his abuse. The institution covered and protected him for years, so he walks freely in my neighborhood, and this is the main reason why I will never stop speaking out."
Did you have any idea it would have the magnitude and the reach and the number of victims that it did?
No.
Not at all.
Just my abuser alone, how many victims came forward to me, that was mind-blowing also. He admitted in the grand jury report his abuse. The institution covered and protected him for years, so he walks freely in my neighborhoods, and this is the main reason why I will never stop speaking out.
Since the U.S.'s large-scale investigation over 3 years ago, 13 states and Washington, D.C. implemented a retroactive law, also known as the look-back window, which paused the statute of limitations and gave a chance for sexual abuse victims to be able to file civil lawsuits. The look-back window is a law that Pennsylvania's state legislature has since failed to pass. Sean says, quote, "Pennsylvania is becoming absurd. It's past overwhelming bipartisan support for the judiciary, Senate, and our Senate Majority Leader refuses to bring it up." Mary tells the interviewer, quote, "Right now I feel empowered because every time I can speak out, it's the one thing I have control in over what happened to me and what happened to the people that I love." These priests continue to take advantage of their positions of power and through their own sick and twisted crimes manipulate children's faith in God. According to these victims, they will continue on to fight. They let other victims around the world know that they must continue on fighting as well. You aren't alone and it isn't your fault. Continue to use your voice. This has been Kristelle and Amos De Los Santos with the news.
I mean, it's affected my life so much.
This is a lifelong issue with survivors.
They have to be accountable, the church, for what they did.
I've waited for a long time for this.
I think this report's gonna help people who don't have a family, because they're gonna know that there's a lot of people out there now that believe them and are behind them.
This is one of the proudest things I've ever done in my life.
I'm so happy.
Speaking about your abuse is a very important step in the healing process.
I just was always saying, they're not going to beat me.
It'll just be refreshing to not have to, I guess, pretend like I'm someone else all the time.